Okay, everyone, I think we can start. There's going to be a few folks that will admit as we keep going along, as they're in the waiting room. But I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Angela Ripley, and I'm a competency-based education and assessment consultant at Bow Valley College in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And my role has been to help the college adopt a competency-based education and assessment methodology. And this presentation will showcase what we've done, what we've learned, and how we plan to continually bring value to our learners. And like Todd said, if anyone has any questions along the way, just please put them in the chat. Before beginning the presentation, out of respect and in the spirit of reconciliation, I'd like to acknowledge that Calgary is located in the traditional territories of the Niitsitapi and the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta. This includes the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, the Tsuut'ina, and the Stoney Nakoda. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. Had this presentation not been virtual, it may have been located within the Fresno State campus, which sits in the midst of the Joaquin Valley, a valley rich in the traditions and representation of the Native American peoples and cultures. We would be in the traditional homelands of the Yokuts and Mono peoples, whose diverse tribal communities share stewardship over the land. We honor and thank all of the people connected to the land, whether that be in Alberta, California, or the many locations from all the participants. So this presentation is meant to be an hour long, and please feel free to ask any questions as we go. And for today, I'd like to give you an overview of our CBE philosophy at Bow Valley College, our development practices, lessons we've learned along the way, and improving our learner experience. So I want to tell you a little bit about Bow Valley College and where we are and how we're situated and who our learner population is. So for over 50 years, Bow Valley College, a public comprehensive community college, has provided a range of programming to Calgary and surrounding areas, including academic upgrading, English language training, and career programming in business, healthcare, information technology, and community and human services. Credit programming includes certificates, diplomas, post-diploma certificates, and post-baccalaureate certificates. Our college, located in the pretty Bow River Valley in Calgary, serves a population of roughly 17,500 learners. And we had approximately 8,700 new learners last year. So speaking about competency-based education, if we look at how we develop competency-based educations, we first must look at who we develop our competency-based education programs for. We develop all of our competency-based education programming with learners in mind so that our graduates will be able to meet the gap that exists within the industry, which has been identified by key external partnerships within the industry. This allows the many successful skilled workers who are looking for ways to adapt to the new economic landscape through targeted and efficient reskilling and upskilling opportunities that fit in with other commitments and obligations. So once we have an understanding of the identified need, we then need to look and work for external partners to develop the competencies required on the job. And in this manner, graduates will be able to reskill or upskill depending on where they are in their life. So I want to talk to you a little bit now about our competency-based education philosophy and what we define a competency as. So we have defined a competency as the observable technical tasks, so the what someone has to do, and the transversal skills, so how you need to do those tasks, like an attitude, behavior, or disposition. And they're associated with a specific job function. So our competencies are aligned to a job function. So depending on the context, a competency may represent a major duty or responsibility of a given occupation, a job role, or a position. So transversal skills are what some people call 21st century skills. So those are behaviors, dispositions, and attitudes transferable between context and application. So if we look at this slide, competencies described in this way are functional because they prepare graduates to function in the workplace. So this slide shows nursing practice. So administering patient medication would be the technical task, and the transversal skill may be to provide psychological support to the patient or their families. So we've kind of baked those transversal and technical tasks together to form a competency. Any questions as we go along? Okay, I'll just keep moving on. So in order to develop competencies, a job task analysis is either completed in consultation with external partnerships, expert practitioners, or compiled from industry data, and then validated with more expert practitioners. This validation is critical as we want to ensure that the job task and the transversal skills are current, relevant, and what's needed in the role. So what you see on this slide is what we document and call a competency profile. So it provides the curriculum map and the blueprint to build training programs that prepare our learners to function in the workplace. So this is an example of one that we did with cloud computing, a post-diploma program. And on the left, you'll notice the competency, and then they're broken down into a series of job tasks. So things that somebody would have to actually do. So as Eric in the keynote alluded to, this application. So we have to have this demonstration. So they actually have to do something. So what is this application of knowledge that they have to do? So then these tasks are broken down into their steps and performance expectations. So as you can see, the job task analysis identifies the competencies, and the job tasks then become the learning outcomes. The steps of those tasks become the learning objectives. And then the criterion are the performance expectations. So at the very right of the column. So we use things that would be deemed critical in the occupation. So what makes someone competent, doing this? If we look at this one, the competency or the job function is implementing code. Well, how do they have to implement code? They have to fulfill stakeholder requirements. So then we talk about the steps of implementing code. And well, one, they have to develop a requirements document. And two, they have to develop a specifications document. And then what's the criteria and what are the critical actions in a requirements document? Clearly, we can't write down everything, but if we're going to use this as the basis of a learning pathway and an assessment, we want to make sure that we've hit on the critical skills that someone would have to demonstrate to be competent. So in this way, our competencies match performance management expectations that you would find in a workforce or in human resources to say, okay, if someone was going to be performance managed, what would you say they'd be performance managed on? Okay, well, they really couldn't do this. They either couldn't do it transversally, they couldn't show the behaviors, or they actually couldn't just do the task. A lot of tasks are learned on the job. It's the transversal skills that we're trying to get at. To make sure that someone has the transversal ability to transfer in between context and tasks. So how do we take that curriculum map and that blueprint and turn it into an assessment? And better yet, how do we turn that into learning pathways? So what is a learner going to do with this curriculum map, and what do we do in the back end? So in this situation, we take the columns in the competency profile and we can actually turn that into our rubric criteria. So then we create a contextual scenario that is based on a competency profile task, and we have all of the criterion built in. So we use subject matter experts to help us come up with the context of what someone would be having to do in the role. So learners have multiple attempts to undertake the competency assessment. So this competency assessment is performance-based. So it accurately measures student performance with respect to the stated competencies. And after each assessment attempt, learners receive detailed feedback on their performance. In this example, we took information from another competency profile that we had built. It was called Business Intelligence Analyst, to create an assessment rubric and then created this contextual scenario for the learner to actually visualize the workplace situation. So we might have details in there such as you work for X company, here's the team that you're a part of, here's the task you've been assigned by your supervisor, this is what the expectations are, here's the timelines, here's the criteria that you're working under. So we give all of that to them so they know exactly what they need to do. So then we give them requirements for submissions. So acceptable evidence. So what can you do to do this assessment? So they have creativity and flexibility in how. We give them some parameters on this evidence submission. So then they work towards completing the assessment. So this assessment can be completed independently, or if it needs to be in collaboration with others, then it's completed that way. So it really does mimic whatever's happening in the real world in that job function. So in these competency-based assessments, learners have the flexibility and decide how they're going to showcase their confidence. The evidence can take a number of forms, including observed performance or submission evidence that can be derived from a wide range of experiences, such as on the job or work integrated learning opportunities. Perhaps someone's gone into a workplace to do a work integrated, almost like a co-op program, where they're actually asked to do the skills required of them. Perhaps that's videoed. And if that's videoed and it can showcase them actually doing the skill, then they would be awarded that competency. And Todd, I might just get you to add a couple people that I think are in the waiting room, if you don't
Oh,
mind.
thank you. Didn't see that.
Yeah, no problem. So it can't be emphasized enough how important that we have found industries and employers validating the job tasks and the assessments. So once we develop this job task analysis, we get it validated by expert practitioners or those that are actually hiring for that role. And then we develop the assessment after that's been approved. Yes, this is relevant. Yes, this is current. Yes, this is what is required on the job. Yes, this is what graduates need to have. We would hire someone with these types of skills. After we do that, we develop the assessment. We go back to those relationships and say, did we hit the mark? Is this assessment something that you think would capture someone's ability to be able to be competent in this role? So that employer validation ensures the accuracy, the currency, and the relevancy of the curriculum. It also ensures that the program and the assessment are aligned to what employers are looking for. So during this employer validation process, the competency profile, the competency assessment, they're validated to garner that feedback and recommended revisions, as well as their support. It's a partnership. We want to make sure that they know that we're teaching students what they deem is really necessary in the workforce. And that way we can have our graduates already having a step forward for the workforce. And when these folks graduate, the partnerships and the employers will know, okay, well, there's a lot of new students that have come out, a lot of new graduates that have these skills that we were looking for. So we believe that this will help ensure that graduates in alignment to what's needed and expected on the job. So how do we deliver this? We have landed on a model called assessment first. And in many places in the United States, I believe it's called direct assessment. We have different regulations in Canada that are different than the United States, but we're just going to tell you a little bit about how we view assessment first. So if I'm going to give you an example. So if we were to look at climbing for an assessment example, we first want to do a diagnostic. We want to first assess the climbing skills. So this would start with identifying the ability of the climber to, say, tie into their ropes effectively and then belay effectively. So we actually allow them to do it. Can you do this? This is what we're asking you to do. Can you go climb that wall? So it's a diagnostic of skills essentially. So they don't get penalized for any sort of skills that they might have coming into it. They don't have to sit and wait. They can show us, these are my skills right now, and this is where I need to go. So in this example, it would then lead to climbing and communicating with their partner. And in the whole grand scheme, this equates to having the learner showcase their skills first to identify where on the mountain of learning they are and where they need to go. So after the initial diagnostic, they receive a personalized learning plan. So I'm going to get into telling you about how we develop those personalized learning plans in a couple of slides. So if we're going to stick with the mountain theme of the Rocky Mountains in Calgary, this image equates to learning and development. So some learners are at the bottom of the mountain looking up, they're acquiring knowledge. While yet others are halfway up the mountain and working on practice simulation. You know, you can think of a nurse in a lab environment because that's where they are. While others are on the top of the mountain, perhaps working in the workplace, supervising others, or doing what's expected of them on the job. So where do they go from there? So while building the curriculum, so we have our competency profile, we have our assessment, we have our assessment rubric. Now we're building the learning pathway. So how have we landed on personalized learning, and what do we do with this learning pathway? So the learning pathway allows for personalization and opportunities for deeper learning. We develop all of this before we offer the course. So we're going to get to the instructor methodology and the model in a minute, but essentially we're building all of this before we offer anything, which kind of alleviates the instructor from having to build a variety of different learning experiences for the students as they're trying to teach. So this learning pathway gives the instructor and gives the learner the opportunity to say, okay, here are some things to think about when you're trying to do this competency or this task. So the learning pathway includes all the relevant learning materials required to develop competence. So learners may work with other learners or mentors or instructors or subject matter experts and peers to expedite their development through both articulating and demonstrating competence. So our learning pathways have 3 tiers of development. So if we look at this example, we have the competency, which is perform occupational therapy interventions. The learning outcome is to handle and modify equipment for activities of daily living. The performance objective is demonstrate the correct handling and modification of equipment for activities of daily living in a clinical setting. So the very first thing that they have to do is they have to adjust a wheelchair or the seating. So then on the very second column is knowledge required. This is for a learner that has no prior understanding of what they're expected to do, and they might not have any experience. So for me, I've never worked in this kind of setting. I would say that's me. I don't know anything there is to know for knowledge on activities of daily living. So you're going to want to start at the bottom for this knowledge acquisition. So we would list then the resources required, and it's aligned to that specific task that they're doing. So we don't say, go read chapter 16. We say, okay, here's what you need to do. Here's an enabling learning objective. You know, you need to be able to understand and describe the adjustable and non-adjustable features of a wheelchair. So you're going to go here and you're going to read these 3 pages. You're going to watch this YouTube video, or you're going to go and you're going to watch this in the workplace, and you're going to have transfer of knowledge. So you're going to try to get to understand what it is they're supposed to do. So the next step is, once the student has a very good understanding, and they have an understanding of the knowledge, they've acquired that knowledge that they need to have in order to do the task, we're going to get them to practice. So this is low fidelity, so low risk. They're going to be practicing in simulated environment. They might be doing it in a lab environment. They might be doing it in an area where other peers are coaching them, or an instructor is there, or subject matter experts helping them and giving them that rapid feedback. So our practice activities are like simulations. So they actually start to do the task in isolation. The third column is workplace skills development. So this is where the learners are actually either going to go into the workplace and try it, so it's a little bit higher fidelity, so they can feel the stress that's in the actual environment to what they're supposed to be doing, and they have to demonstrate it. So at each phase of these development areas, there is this formative development. There's instructors and coaches and subject matter experts that can help them along the way, depending on where they are. So one learner might land here and say, you know what, I just need a few more simulation activities on this, and I think I'll be ready to take the assessment. Or another learner can say, well, I've already been working in this field for 5 years. I just don't have the certificate. So I'm going to expedite my development and I'm going to go to workplace skill development. So what happens if a student lands there first and then we realize, oh, they don't quite have the knowledge? We constantly do this feedback loop where we go back and say, you know what, you really didn't have the knowledge there. So we advise you to go back and try the knowledge activities. And these are the types of knowledge formative activities where this is where we can have our tests. So if they need rote memorization, if they need to have any kind of knowledge test for that sort of understanding in order for them to do the skills, this is where we would send them back to. So any questions on the learning pathway? Okay. So what does this look like for a learner? How do we give them the learning pathway? How do we manage this? So for learners' formative development, we focus on the key areas, like I discussed, about the knowledge, the skill acquisition, and the skill application. So instructors are there to help the students in their learning journey. So this is a recent build that we just did in our learning management system, Brightspace D12. And so a student would come here and they would get the task. So they're going to see the task. They have to determine, in this course, it's determine business objectives. That's what they need to do. So they're going to get an understanding of what does that mean? What is the context of it in workplace? You're going to get a little paragraph, a narrative around that. And then they're going to have choice. So they can further develop their understanding by clicking on the background, or they can go to simulated practice activities, or they can do application. So each one of these might have different criteria depending on the complexity and the context of the task. So if they're required to do collaboration, they'll probably find that in practice. If they're required to go on the job to do this, they'll find that in apply. If they have to do more knowledge and understanding work, they'll do that in background. So they're free to look at all of them. And then our personalized learning pathway that we have developed after their assessment, we can point them in that direction. You know, on this task, we really think you should probably focus on knowledge before you start your practice. And in this task, you were actually quite good. You had just missed a couple of key components. So we would advise you to go to apply. So that's how we've personalized the learning pathway. How do we deliver this? So this is going back to what we kind of consider is a rough direct assessment. So we call it assessment first approach, and it just refers to how learners progress through a course or a program. So in this model, the learners come in, they get onboarded to CBE. So are you ready to learn in a competency-based education approach? So what does that mean? Well, how does it look? How is it different than traditional education or traditional programming at the college that they might be used to? So this is where we then right away we do a diagnostic. So we do a competency assessment. And we allow them to do this competency assessment multiple times. However, when they first walk in, we give them that diagnostic. Some students might elect, I'm not ready for that. I don't want to do the competency assessment at all. They might be fearful, and we'll say, no problem. You can go right to the learning pathway. You can look at all of the resources. When you're ready to come back and do the competency assessment, you can do it at any time when you're ready to do it. We have timelines. That's on the unfortunate thing of having a business is that there are timelines for each competency. So they might have anywhere between, 6 weeks to 3 months, 4 months to be able to prove competency. And at that time, we'll say, okay, we'll work with them to figure out what's happening, where they are in their skill development, and what they need to do. So in this case, they come in. If a learner says, yeah, I want to try that competency assessment, I just want to see what it feels like, because that's what this is their summative assessment. This is what they're going to need to do in order to prove competence. So they try it. An instructor gives them very detailed feedback on exactly what they did and exactly what the expectations were. They're given the rubric ahead of time. They know what they're supposed to do. Remember, this is a demonstration assessment. So they get that feedback. They go ahead, they go work on their personalized learning plan in whatever manner they need. So it's learner-centered. So if a learner says, I need instruction, then we provide instruction. And an instructor might say, I'm offering a lecture 3 times a week on this task. I'm going to offer a lecture on this competency. I'm going to be using teamwork and collaboration on Wednesday for this. So the students can choose then what they participate in. When they're ready, they come back, they do the competency assessment again. So it just keeps evolving like this cycle. So they might try it again to get a little bit more familiar with it. It's just another practice attempt for them to be able to do the skills that's required in the workforce. They go back, they do the personalized learning plan. So we at Bow Valley right now have capped the competency assessment at 3 times, but it's flexible. So if an instructor only has 6 students, they might be able to offer the competency assessment 5 times. So it's kind of an arbitrary number. It really depends on what the learners need and what the instructor has for their students. But right now, just to have policy, they have a maximum up to 3 attempts to do their competency assessment. So we're really trying to work with these students to make sure that they understand when you do this competency assessment, it's 1 try out of 3. So you're going to have multiple attempts. We're going to give you lots of feedback in between. You're going to go have a chance to practice it in your formative development, then come back to do your competency assessment. Alexander asked, can we have access to the slides? Yes, of course. I think this will be accessible after this presentation. So if a learner can demonstrate competency when they first walk in, they receive credit for completion and they receive more feedback. So yes, you have completed this competency. We believe your next step is ABC. So we give that feedback to them. If they don't demonstrate competency, they're provided actionable feedback in this personalized learning plan based on a learning pathway that we've already developed to address the gaps and help build their skills. So this slide looks a little overwhelming, so I'm going to talk you through it. So on the left, a traditional program, learners come into a set term, speed, and path. So they advance upon the terms and have a number of courses they have to complete each term. In a competency-based education program, a learner can come in and move through a series of competencies. And once they have achieved competency, they can move on to the next competency. So we've also started to develop micro-credentials within our programs, which equate to competencies. So 1 competency equals 1 micro-credential. 1 competency equals 1 job function. So it's a big area of responsibility you have to do in your job role. So in a typical program, in a traditional program, the learner is based on terms. And if they leave, say on term 2, they don't leave with anything because they leave with the knowledge and the course activities, but they don't leave with an actual certificate. In a competency-based education program, we have these built micro-credentials. So on the non-credit side, they can take this micro-credential, but if they want to take the program, it might be a series of 3 or 4 micro-credentials put together that form a program. So say they decide to leave at the end of micro-credential or competency 2, they would then have received 2 micro-credentials for this program. So it's an accessible demonstrated skill that is based in a job function. So not all is lost if they leave the program. And this is attestable And it's a digital credential that they can then showcase, and they can apply for opportunities with these assessed skills, knowing that employers have helped to build these micro-credentials with this job task analysis. So they can still receive a credential that's relevant to the workplace. Can you remind us how a student determines the traditional versus CBE? Are you offering parallel programs, and how do you memorialize micro-credentials? Okay, good question. So yes, we do offer parallel programs. So currently right now we have a series of credit programs, non-CBE. We have CBE programs, and we have micro-credentials. A micro-credential at Bow Valley College is competency-based. That is one of our I guess our philosophy around competency-based education. These digital credentials, they will be competency-based. What do you mean by your second question?
Hi, what I meant is I was trying to determine, like, how do you record them so that the students can carry them? Are you using your same student information system? Are they transcribed on their academics? I was just wondering how you did that.
Yeah, so they're the same credentials that we would offer in traditional side. So essentially, they're cataloged the exact same way. So when they enroll into a micro-credential, or they enroll into a course, or they enroll into a program. So at the end of the day, they are just awarded that credential. So this time they're getting a micro-credential, or they get a course, or they get a program. Does that answer your question?
Yes, so they're still, so they would be on the same academic transcript or the same student transcript.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Yep, no problem. Okay. Any other questions before we move on to all of the big lessons that we've learned along the way? Okay. So my favorite part, lessons learned, because there's been a lot of them. If we think about it, lessons learned are like climbing a staircase with the goal to get to the top. And if we think of the lessons under each stair and not cringe at them, when we first start to go up, we have a few ideas and experiences under that first stair. And then we take those to the second stair. So we're modifying, adapting, changing, we keep moving, and we take those experiences, modifications as we move up. However, it is important to remember where you came from, and to have the organizational memory to say, oh yes, I remember when we tried that. This was the impact, the outcome, the disaster, and even failures under those stairs are okay. So they're bound to happen when trying something new. It's important to recognize, remember, and modify, but just keep moving forward with those lessons. Lessons aren't necessarily negative. Keep trying, keep putting the work in, keep doing the repetitions. So we want to talk to you right now, or I want to talk to you right now about a few of our lessons that we've had the chance to experience in our CBE journey. So for this presentation, I've centered the lessons learned around these pillars. So CBE adoption from an institutional lens, and then the 4 phases of program and micro-credential development. So the planning phase, the actual curriculum development phase, the implementation or rollout stage, and then our evaluation of continuous improvement. So we're going to be looking more at a program lens than an institutional lens, but everything is around the institution, so the college. So how could we improve? What did we learn? So let's move to the first phase. So lessons learned 1, the adoption of competency-based education methodology. So we still find ourselves in the adoption phase. I came to the college in 2018, and so we're still rolling out competency-based education. We started on the non-credit side. We moved to micro-credentials. We moved to credit programming. We did it all at once. And so one of the biggest lessons learned, which I've heard in other presentations, is the importance of having a change management approach. So one that is participatory, inclusive, and restorative. So if CBE touches almost every aspect of the college, then it's important to recognize the amount of people, processes, and impacts it's going to have. And so one of the major lessons that I learned were my own assumptions. When I came to the college, I had assumed everyone was up to speed on competency-based education and that they were ready for the change and they were excited and they were enthusiastic and they had that drive and passion that I did. And so I quickly learned that that wasn't necessarily the case. Oftentimes, it wasn't the fact that people were adamant against CBE, but they just were not aware of what that change meant to their own role. And oftentimes, there were many misconceptions, myths, and misperceptions of what CBE was and what it was not. So, for example, I remember in one realm, we were up against statements that competency-based education meant that we were moving fully online. And it was not going to meet international students or regulatory seat requirements. And it was an additional add-on to traditional delivery. And it was just going to be way too much for instructors to take on. So to address some of these misconceptions and misperceptions, we tried to develop CBE working committees to discuss all the upcoming changes and the processes and decisions of impact. We tried to make this inclusive and so folks felt like they had a voice. So we tried to slow things down to say, okay, we're just going to stop development on CBE right now, and we're just going to make sure that everyone understands where we are and why we're moving towards this change. So we actually invited the executive to come in and speak to these sorts of different changes that were coming on. And our executive was really behind CBE, and they had made several change management videos for us on why we're adopting this sort of change. So the committee was inclusive in nature and had wide representation across the college, from learning experts, the registrar, IT leaders, and student support services, just to name a few. We hosted lunch and learns, internal and external marketing campaigns, information sessions, announcements, communication, and calls to action. It was realized that because of the breadth of CBE, that it was not going to be done by one person or one small team. So we learned that in order for it to be successful, it was going to have to first be accepted and then adopted to move forward. We also had to make sure that our college had gone through a lot of changes in the last, I'd say, 4 years. So we wanted to make sure that people were actually willing to participate because they were ready for this change. So another key lesson is looking to others for lessons learned on their own CBE journey. So in this slide, I've just taken a couple of images from the CBEN website. If you don't know about CBEN, they are a host of resources. They offer free huddles each month. They're very good. They're a very friendly bunch, and they have a lot of quality matrix. They have readiness guides. They have storytelling kits. So they have been there before, and now their role is to try to help institutions to be ready for CBE and to help them through that change. So you can find a host of pre-made tools and experiences from others. So I think the key is to just be curious and find out what else is out there. So these user guides exist, and going to conferences and hearing other lessons learned certainly helped me, because then we could say, okay, we're on the right path. There's just a couple of bumps along the way, but this is what we're learning as we go. So that pretty much summarized our adoption. We're still in adoption. We're still learning lessons on how to do it better and how to gain widespread acceptance. So the planning phase. So I'll tell you a little bit about our planning phase. So at Bow Valley College, our planning phase is about coming up with the concept. So what's the proof of concept? What's the idea? Where did it come from? Did you identify a market analysis need? Do you see like this program we really need to offer and why? So this planning phase is critical. So it's coming up with the idea, coming up with the research that validates that idea. It has to be driven by the industry or say an employer. It can be a custom build for a business, or it could be a relevant need that learners are looking for. So this planning phase, I think, is the most critical of all of the phases in utilizing a competency-based education approach. Because we have found if you get this one wrong, you're going to spend a lot of time spinning wheels. So when thinking to develop a CBE course micro-credential program, we first had to figure out, is there a need? So find the demand. What do our industry relationships and program advisory committees tell us? What are skilled professionals needing to upskill or reskill? The second thing is establishing a project team with the correct members. So the importance that it has the expertise. So we're looking here for expert practitioners, subject matter experts, learning and CBE staff, and leaders. So assembling the project team is important in the development phase to conduct a job task analysis, but it must be with the right people. It must be with those that are in the role currently, can speak to the relevancy and accuracy. So those expert practitioners that have been deemed very super competent. So a well-selected expert practitioner can make the whole process go very quick. A poor one can hold up the project significantly, and it can cause it to actually fail. So thinking of this deliverable in the end, what do you want the learners to do? What do you want your graduates to be able to do and be confident in? And this is importance of program and micro-credential selection. So at Bow Valley, we look for clear job functions and look for those working in those areas that can help us build a competent program. We want our learners to be competent, so we have to start with a competent curriculum. So this means right down to the competency analysis, our profile, our learning pathway, our curriculum map, our rubric, and our learning pathways. We want it to be relevant, current, and accurate. So one of the biggest lessons that we learned was a program that we probably spent 1.5 years on, and it was a call to meet the need of those working in the IT sector. However, I think a market analysis, a deeper market analysis on what the learners really needed to dive in for, we had not reflected that in a job function. So it was almost like Field of Dreams, build it and they're going to come. Our enrollment data did not support that. So that was one of our biggest lessons learned, that we had to make sure that these job functions were actually in need. And there's a lot of variety of tools that you can use for that. We've started to look at EMSI, so EMSI. So EMSI is, it helps you kind of data mine the actual market analysis. So who's hiring? What do the job descriptions look like? What are the skills that they're looking for? And that helps to guide you in those conversations with employers and industry. And Suhail has just put on economicmodeling.com. Thank you, Suhail. Suhail actually works with me at Bow Valley College. So any other questions that you have for a supervisor, this is the time to ask. Lessons learned 3, development phase. So third in our lessons comes the development phase. So in our development process, this is where we have competency-based education experts, we have teaching and learning consultants, we have expert practitioners, we have subject matter experts, we have the media team, we have leaders, and we have program sponsors. So when we developed the CBE process, we were pretty sure that it was a great process and it was going to work. But when trying something new and without the lessons learned, the battle scars, it's easy to try to jump steps, expedite, or take shortcuts in your process. One thing that I learned over and over and over is to trust the process and to have others trust the process. So we learned that to develop from a market or industry need, determining a job function in order to recruit and obtain expert practitioners in subject matter experts was vital. Validation is the key in the development step. as we want to ensure that our competencies, assessments, and learning pathways are reflective of what's needed for the graduate. So we're always thinking about the learner as a graduate and their opportunities after being awarded with a Bow Valley College credential. We want to make the mark. So in this idea that we want to have in the development phase, we want to be able to do the curriculum mapping. We want to write all of the content. We want to have all of the activities. We want to make sure it's validated with the employers and the industry, and they can vouch for, yes, if a student can come out doing these skills, this is someone we'd be willing to hire. And making sure that you have that project team that all works together on the project. We have found and this is just the way it is that oftentimes there's not continuity of folks on a project team, but we've found that it's best if you can have one project team together working seamlessly and identifying those roles and responsibilities within a project plan or a project charter, and just to make sure that everyone knows what they're doing and how to work with each other and that sort of thing. And then we go back to validate with the industry. So that covers the development phase. And our development phase is probably our longest phase within these phases, besides the actual implementation for the length of time that students are actually enrolled. So we have 5 lessons learned. We're on 4. Implementation. So we're still working to improve all of our phases, but we can talk now about what we learned in the implementation phases. So we keep working towards improving learner experience. We want to work on streamlining and delivering the information in our learning management system in a way that's easily digestible to a learner, and it's also easily built for us. So we're trying to use experiences that work from evaluations on learners to say, you know, how was this experience for you? And then we're trying to template that so we don't have to do these custom builds each time that we build a course. We also want to develop them that way for consistency and sustainability across other CBE offerings. So as this is new, we're trying new things, and one of our continuous improvement efforts has been to looking at these things as simple as, you know, multiple logins from a variety of platforms. That was one learner experience. A lot of feedback came in on that on one course. We had partnered with a technology company, and so the learners had to log into our system, and they had to log into the technology system, and then they logged into our learning management system, and it was a little bit too cumbersome, and the learners just found that. So if you're losing your learners in the beginning with their experience being poor, it's probably not going to be satisfactory, and they're probably going to be frustrated from the beginning. So, you know, it seems simple, but it's the little things that count, and making sure that their experience is as seamless as possible. We've learned that this is a major change in how we deliver and teach learners. Most faculty have been very engaged and supportive in trying something new, even though we haven't even worked out all the versions of what the faculty model might look like. One lesson that we've learned is we need to try different things that aren't etched in stone. For example, we were currently utilizing an assessment first delivery model, and this may or may not work for all learners. So we're trying to be as adaptable as possible to meet varied learner needs. And we're also trying to meet our business needs. And sometimes that's just not going to work for our faculty needs. We're trying to make this as learner-centered as possible. So as long as we're meeting the learner needs, then we feel like our learner experience is going to be positive. As the pillars for CBE at Bow Valley are learner-centered, learners should be able to expedite their program pace. We've also realized that there's government regulatory expectations that our international students need to meet. At first glance, it seemed that our CBE model wouldn't fit these students, but we always had to come back to rethink how we were doing it. So if CBE is learner-centered, it needs to meet learner needs. If a learner needs to have seat time to meet the expectation of their program, then we're going to revise our approach and deliver it to meet that need. So this meant that we had to rethink some aspects of the delivery model to allow for those government definitions of face-to-face learning and the requirements that international learners had to have over 50% of their course load face-to-face in order to meet eligible post-graduation work permits. So even though we're still adopting, I think we're always going to be in the adoption of the CBE model and methodology. I don't think it ever really stops. It's not like, oh, we're done now, we'll roll this out. I think we always have to continually evolve and improve what we're doing to make sure it's fitting the needs of learners. And our fifth major lesson was on continuous improvement. So this is something we're continually doing in all of our CBE phases and development approaches, but we have learned a few things along the way. So defining and determining what quality looks like has been instrumental in ensuring that we offer a consistent approach in our planning, development, implementation phases. So creating tools and guides to help staff and learners has definitely been a lesson learned. From marketing videos on what CBE is to glossary guidebooks and templates and process flow charts and continual consultative efforts have helped members in the college to learn, accept, and hopefully adopt a CBE methodology. So we started small, first in continuing education space, and now we're moving towards developing CBE credit program. And for sustainability practices, we needed to have processes that were well-defined, accepted, and improved to gain mass support. And these processes are also fluid. We're constantly changing them. When we learn, we continually modify to improve. So essentially, that wraps up a lot of words. This concludes the part of the presentation, and if you'd like to turn your cameras on and have an informal discussion or ask any questions, feel free to do so. Questions, comments? Suhail, you want to start with the jokes?
No, I think this is great. I think, Angela, knowing what you know, and we always have conversations, but I think, like, what do you think what's the biggest mistake do you think we made as a college in the way we try to implement CBE, or the way we've done CBE or not done CBE?
I think, a valuable lesson learned was that we were so excited to try everything that we tried it all at once, everywhere. All the instructors, all the deans, all the programs, we're all going CBE at the same time. So we're not just going to concentrate on one program, we're going to do a wide scale across the college. So I think that might have been probably our biggest error. And we're just very fortunate to have an executive that said, okay, if we need to slow down to speed up, we're going to do that. So concentrate your efforts on what you need to do to learn the lessons that you need to learn in order for this to go wider.
Hi, I had a question.
For sure.
So can you talk a little bit? I know you mentioned it in one of your lessons learned, but specifically the scale. So how many programs do you have currently that would be CBE?
So right now we have, correct me if I'm wrong, Suhail, but I think we have 2 programs, but we have several micro-credentials that are CBE.
Okay. And then the second question I had was, as you were, I wanted to learn more about your college. So as I went to the website, I was wondering, how do you market this option to students? Like from the student experience, I get what you got from the student user experience, but like for students to know that this option is available, when they're not yet enrolled, or I'm just wondering if you can speak a little bit to that.
That's a really good question. That's something that we just did in the last 6 months, actually. So now when we offer a CBE program, we market that in our selection. So we'll put the program out, and we'll also put a video. This is CBE. This is why you might want to take it. These are the advantages of CBE. You can also do it traditional, and here are some advantages for traditional. So we give them that choice when we advertise for the program. So we do it as a marketing package within the program. And we also have an external facing website that talks a little bit about CBE. Of course, we're always updating and evolving, and we're trying to make that a little bit more comprehensive. We did hire a marketing company to do a holistic, larger scale, high level competency-based education video. So that was one of the lessons learned, that I don't think people really understand what CBE is, and where that gap is. I think people will kind of fill in their own story. So we have kind of started to go full gung whole on marketing.
And then my final question related somewhat to that is, can you speak about the type of learner that's really kind of gravitating to this? And I'm making an assumption considering your website and some of the things you talked about. I imagine if you are an immigrant who had taken a lot of studies, is this something that they're like, what type of learner and what's the difference in terms of who you're getting in the CBE programs versus the traditional?
Yeah, and a lot of our learners in some of our IT programs are international. So we have a lot of international students. And for those students that have that prior learning or prior skills and they're coming to Canada because they need to have the certification or they want to move here with their families, we're finding that learner, and especially learners that already have employment somewhere else, this is really fitting in well for their schedule. It's really fitting in well for the adult learner that has already had job experience and skill exposure.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Let's see, Amanda. Do you have the link for the external facing website you just mentioned? Suhail, do you have that handy by chance? I could probably pull it up too, but Suhail can put it in the chat.
Sorry, just want to confirm the link to just our website or the competency-based education part of the website. Maybe I'll just put them both in there.
Yeah,
it was
sure.
the one that you had said on your college had mentioned that I'm simultaneously sending all this information to my colleagues and we're brainstorming what to do at our, so I'd love to be able to have that link.
And Suhail, do you have the video link as well?
Yeah, let me
Okay,
get that for you.
we'll put that in the chat too. It's always helpful when you have a colleague on the call that you can call on in these presentations.
You know, I knew I would regret coming and supporting. Okay, so I put the Bow Valley College.ca link, and I'll find the other link and I'll post that up. I'm gonna post that.
Yeah, I think the video gives a really good understanding of a little bit of CBE. I mean, it's more high level and it's meant to reach the students and prospective students so they understand, like, if I come and take a CBE program, this is what it's going to look like. And this is the advantage of a CBE program. And we're still working. I think we've been very busy working on our internal development that sometimes you forget, oh, we're really busy working on our internal development, but we really need to work on what we're doing externally, like our external facing websites. You know, we're continually improving and saying, okay, well, when are we going to dedicate time to do that?
That's actually a good point, actually, and I just want to jump on that for a second because, like, I think for too long it was a once we build it, they're going to come anyway kind of mentality, but we're trying to, and we realized it later on after we started just like, oh, but we have to tell people, we have to communicate to people the actual value. Like, you're getting you're fundamentally getting a different product, and so you should know what this different product is instead of just, you know, you'll come in and surprise, CBE. So, like, we're working hard towards that right now.
Yeah.
Well, we're at the end of our time, everybody. If you want to hang out and chat some more, you're welcome to do so. We have a 15-minute break right now between now and the next session, which starts at 11:15. I'm going to stop the recording at this point, but please feel free to hang out and continue talking.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.